Hi, this is Larry Bauer, Chief Executive Officer Emeritus of the Family Medicine Education Consortium, and I'm very excited today to be talking with Dr. Richard Hohman, who I need to give you a little background on Dr. Hohman. He was a resident where I was on the faculty at the Department of Family and Community Medicine at Penn State University in Hershey, Pennsylvania, a few years ago. And as I recall, Rick, as a resident, you said, this is my memory now, that you would never pursue an academic career. And when you left Penn State Hershey, you went out to the Southwest, to the Indian reservations, and you were in a practice out there, and it gave you a chance to really hone your family medicine skills and somehow inspired you to a career in academic family medicine. You left there and went to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where you became the residency director at the Williamsport Family Medicine Residency Program for a number of years, until you got recruited down to Texas, where you went to work with Dr. Ted Kantner, and you eventually became the chair of the Department of Family Medicine, and then were drafted to become, by the other chairs, if I'm remembering the stories correctly, by the other chairs in the medical school. When the dean's position came open, they said, Rick Hohman is our guy. He's got to be the dean of this school. From there, you were recruited to the only medical school, in my knowledge, that went bankrupt in Philadelphia. And that was formerly the MCP Hahnemann Medical School. And Rick, help me on the name. I'm blanking on the correct name.
Well, it was the Allegheny Research Education Foundation, because it was merged with hospitals in Pittsburgh, and as well as Philadelphia, and that went bankrupt, underwent Chapter 11, and then they went through a few leaders and deans, and then finally got to me. And I helped to stabilize it and reorganize it after the bankruptcy. Okay,
and then from there, you were recruited to another medical school, Eastern Virginia Medical School, where you became the president, provost, and dean and CEO of the practice plan. So for a guy who said, I would never pursue a career in academic medicine, you have quite a distinguished career. And you've told me also that you helped to create a fourth medical school down in El Paso, Texas. So 3 times the charm plus qualifies you for having had a career in academic family medicine. So I'm deeply impressed. And I want to give people a chance to get to know you. So is there anything else that you wanted to add to your introduction?
That's more than adequate, Larry. Thank you.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up? What, your family? How'd you end up going to medical school?
Sure. Well, I grew up in New York, on Long Island in New York, and went to high school in what's called Nassau County, which is more urbanized. My dad worked in a rural place, a little cottage at Shelter Island, New York. That's where actually we live now. Rita and I, my wife and I, met here when we were 19. I was a dishwasher and she was a waitress. And we have a lot of history here because my family's all passed away, my twin brother, older brother, and parents. And we've had services for them. So their ashes are on the little beach here. We lost a son 15 years ago. And so it's sort of a sanctuary in this area. So that's why we settled in this way. We had 3 children. One passed away. One's daughter is in Denver, and our son is in Providence, Rhode Island. And so we're close to the son in Providence, and they've been able to come down because it's not that far away. And during the time that I was looking to see what I wanted to do in undergrad, I went to Brown and thought I was going to be a biomedical engineer, and then spent a lot of time as a little math whiz, spent a lot of time with some really smart people, but recognized they weren't as, I'll say, balanced, okay, in terms of their their intellectual curiosity, because everybody's so subspecialized in those areas. And so I volunteered in an emergency room. I said, gosh, let me turn directions going to medicine. I like taking care of patients, seeing people, combine science, learn, and take care of people, especially those that are most underserved. And so when I went to medical school, my wife and I met, as I mentioned, when we were 19. I was married at 22, and she's an older woman. She was 23 at the time, 9 months old.
Right.
So we didn't have any money, so we had the National Health Service Corps, and I went through the National Health Service Corps, and that's what took us to Arizona, to the West, which was a great experience because it provided an opportunity to see a totally different culture. Learned that medicine in the Anglo world, you get an A in, but you go to the Native American culture and population, you flunk, and you have to be, they call it cultural competency now. But you have to learn. I learned a lot during that process. I learned a lot through you, Larry, frankly, during the residency program, in terms of how to communicate with patients, how to connect with people, how to allow them to be able to ask questions, respond to their feelings, try to be a healer as well as a physician. And then that was even multiplied more robustly when I was in the Indian Health Service. I really enjoyed that. And so after that, I thought, we had students that came to the res from University of Arizona, like teaching them, and thought, well, maybe I'll be a community teacher. So that's what attracted me to go to Pennsylvania, Williamsport, because it really wasn't academic. It wasn't the university setting where family medicine is kind of always a second class or third class citizen. And that allowed me to gain some of my educational skills and hone those skills. And then after that, Ted Kantner, as you mentioned, he was my chair at Hershey, recruited me to go to Texas Tech, and that was a real university, but it had a mission. It had a mission of serving the rural and border communities of West Texas, kind of like a family doc does, taking care of the community as well as the patients. And that's what I've learned over the time is I took care of the numerator for many, many years, taking care of thousands and thousands of people. And then you take care of the denominator as well, meaning the community. And that's what attracted me there. So I was there for almost 17 years. And I just kept, I was kind of the idiot who everybody stepped back a foot and I was left on the line.
Right.
I got drafted to do stuff. So I became a chair too early in my career. It's 35. And so I never got the chance really to, enjoy a real academic career. Most of what I accomplished was program development, a lot of HRSA grants for developing outreach, border, rural programs, and felt like that was the mission that I had. That's what I wanted to do. And so the research component of it sort of slipped, and I didn't have time for that as I started to build programs, turn financial opportunities for the Health Sciences University so that we could make our money to be able to serve the underserved. And that was kind of the theme over time. And so I transitioned from being, initially a doc of the Native Americans, and then rural areas in Pennsylvania, then rural and border in Texas, migrant workers, homeless people. And then I became the doc to all the chairs, and then the administrators in the school, and then some legislators and people that you would recognize their names, donors, and I still, always felt as if my commitment was to those that were the least able to get care, because they're the ones that were most grateful for providing the care. The ones that have it and the privilege, they say thank you, and they're very gracious. But the people that don't have the choice were the ones that were so grateful because so many people ignored them, or they didn't provide good care, or they just did wallet biopsies and try to find ways not to take care of them. And so I think it was that passion that I had, was to try to eventually transition from the numerator, taking care of individual patients, which I loved, to the denominator, doing both, and then focusing on the denominator, meaning training the next generation of physicians, health professionals, scientists, identifying ways to have a financially sustainable model for an academic health center to be able to have the missions, which is the most difficult component of it. Really, it was tough. And I got a lot of skills in that along the way, a lot. And, you know, successful in turning and augmenting the financial status of the institutions so that they can meet their missions. And then when each one was able to do well, I felt it was time for me to walk off the field, and then new opportunities became available to start all over again.
Right.
I've been pinged again to do it again, but my wife says if I do that, I do it alone. So because it's a lot of work, because you don't take any reputational capital with you when you go to new positions like this. You have to start from scratch and do it all over again. And that took a lot of energy and tenacity and resilience.
So Rick, over the years, we continued to stay in touch and you shared stories with me, and I hope I have these stories correct. So you can correct me if my memory is off. But I recall when you were down in Texas, you told me about a VIP service that you created, and it provided a vehicle for you to serve the people of means, so that you could serve the people who were in greatest need. But could you talk about that VIP service and how you responded to service opportunities that were before you?
Yeah, I think what I try to do is be opportunistic, essentially, for the departments that I work for and the schools that I work for. So in that context, initially, you know, I took care of a lot of the patients, as I mentioned, the underserved, and they came to us all the time, so that was easy to do, and I enjoyed that. But then over time, people recognized, I guess, that I was a decent doc, and they started referring people to me. So then, as I took care of the leadership in the university and the community members, and all of a sudden, donors would be referred to me by the leadership of the university and the Health Sciences Center, and I would take care of them. So I became really a concierge doc for a lot of them. Some would call me on a Saturday and say, "Hey, Rick, I'm coming into the football game. You know, it starts at 1. Which is more convenient for me to see you, at 10 in the morning or at 4 before I fly out?" You know, and how do you say no? And then eventually what we did is I worked with the hospital system to create a managed care product, essentially before its time, and a hospitalization product for all the indigent patients. And I took call, in addition to call with the department, every third night, managing every patient that didn't have insurance. There were 3 people that ran the service, myself and 2 general internists. And then we developed a formulary for these patients. They were all what were called county indigent patients, meaning they had no funding at all. And so I told the hospital administrator, I said, you know, initially when we started this, I said, "Who's your worst payer in your hospital?" And he said, "Well, of course, it's Medicare." I said, "Well, you're wrong. It's all the patients that don't have insurance, because they're displacing the patients like Medicaid patients and Medicare and insurance." We didn't have a lot, but we had some that were actually floating your bottom line. So if we can manage those patients and work with them in the hospital so that they actually got out relatively appropriately. So because a lot of people didn't feel as if they needed to be managed because, you know, the utilization review people weren't overseeing them. So we became our own utilization review process and managed them appropriately, and then got them into medical homes, primary care medical homes, most of which were family docs. And then that kept the costs down. And the hospital loved it because they could find a way then to open up more beds for Medicaid patients and Medicare patients, and still provide good care, more managed care, more coordinated care. So the patients that didn't have the means weren't corks in the ocean, sort of bobbing along, getting sick and then winding up in the ER and getting admitted. And it was all random. So we organized that in a way so that it actually was very functional, and it became a hospitalist service, essentially. This is 25 years ago, before hospitalists were even known. And then we started doing telemedicine programs as well with some of the nursing homes in the region to try to keep the patients in rural areas that couldn't have access to primary care docs after hours. I actually took call in my little closet okay, through a video camera, working with nurses in nursing homes, 40, 80 miles, 100 miles away. So we tried to develop ways before it became fashionable, before Teladoc went on the stock market. We helped to develop this 20-something years ago at Texas Tech. I always wish I could have monetized that in some way, because heck, I'd probably have a foundation now,
Right.
funding imaging care someplace, and helping other people through financial means. But it was through those opportunities where you just thought creatively and then aligned your efforts to try to improve the health of the underserved together with the financial concerns of the hospital administrators, and it clicked and it worked. And that developed into a program that still exists today.
So one of the other stories you told me was that you were so successful developing contracts, bringing revenue in to the system, that one of your major challenges when you were dean down in Texas Tech was how to distribute, or maybe it was while you were chair of the Department of Family Medicine, how to distribute the bonuses equitably so that everyone benefited from that. And that, to me, was quite a remarkable story, that you succeeded that well. Want to comment on that?
Well, that was more when I was family medicine chair, because that's the reason why I got drafted to become the dean, frankly, is because we were the most successful department. We, expanded our residency programs to over 90, I think, almost 100 residents across all the campuses. And then, we helped to run through that imaging care program a lot of the patient care. Hospitals supported us in that way. And as a result of the volumes that we had, enormous volumes, working with nursing homes, our primary care, the hospital programs that we had where we were admitting to 3 hospitals, it brought in a lot of revenue. And the issue for me was we had so many overages, and a lot of it was attributed to me in the formulas we developed. And I felt too guilty distributing the amount that would have been objectively provided to me through the formula, because I felt it was too much. So, I changed the comp models to try to wind down the amount that I could get so I could distribute it among the faculty more robustly, I'll say.
Okay.
And as a result of the financial success in the residency programs, that's and taking care of the patients, and taking care of a lot of the leaders, that's how I became the dean. I recall you're bringing up some information. I remember, Brucker, was it Tom Brucker, who used to be the president of Thomas Jefferson a long time ago?
Paul Brucker.
Paul Brucker.
Yeah.
Long time ago. Yeah, he actually came to be a speaker in the residency program when we were there together. And he said, well, if you want to go into family medicine, because he's a family doc, and became the president of Thomas Jefferson University, which is a big deal back then because they didn't have any people at that level. So if you want to go into academic medicine, there are 3 ways you can succeed. One is you can go out and, and get NIH grants and get your own lab and get a horde of rats and lab animals and do experiments and be on the cover of Science magazine, and you'll get tenure, you'll become a leader in academic medicine. Another is to become a clinical scientist, where you're a subspecialist in a specialty, where you have the ability to be able to do the clinical piece with basic science you may know in the Health Sciences Center, and do the same thing, but not as robustly on the research side, but you rely a lot on yourself and some of the other colleagues in basic science to be able to develop the programs. And I'm going, no. And then the last thing he said was, or you can be a family doc and take care of everybody who makes the decisions. Okay. And I go, ding, 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 ding. Okay. Just be the doc that you are, be a good role model, and maybe somebody will notice. Okay. That resonated. And ironically, or kind of poignantly, when I went to Philadelphia, I was inducted into the Philadelphia Academy of Medicine there. And we had to sign a book, with, Halstead and Osler, all these names on the books that had been inducted years and years ago. And guess who inducted me? Paul Brucker.
Wow.
Yeah. So life has a way of coming full circle. It's coming today in full circle, talking to you, because you were influential in my career early on as well.
Well, thank you for that. I do appreciate that. So I want to move you forward now. You, your ability to, let's call it, do the math, in addition to be of service, which is at the core of who you are as a human being, as well as a family physician. You also were really good with the math. You figured out, and you learned how to sign contracts, develop contracts that were fair, equitable, and beneficial to the organization. And when I get around a lot, I have in the course of my career, and there aren't that many deans, quite honestly, and certainly not chairs of family medicine, who had that particular skill set, that propensity. You want to comment on that? I mean, is that a special gift for you? Is that something that you developed along the way?
Well, we're all products of the, God's grace and hard work, essentially, and being and taking advantage of opportunities. And so, I was lucky because it became intuitive to me that the way to run the business, and yet it's a business. When I was running the medical schools, it's the business of research and education. It's no different, I hate to say it, than being, the division chief of Chevrolet within GM. You got to make your margin, and you got to make money to be able to have sustainable funding, to be able to keep everybody employed, and to be able to have excess resources to invest in quality and research. So it came naturally to me, but the key piece was, I always thought, you have to create something of value. You can't go to somebody and say, I need money for this, okay? You get that all the time, okay? I mean, when I was the president and dean of medical schools, anytime anybody came to my office, it wasn't to say, hey, Rick, we got a ton of money we want to give you, we want to do this, I got a solution. No, it's, I got this problem, I need money. Well, then we'd have to work together to figure out what the value proposition of that is, okay? How do you create value to the department, to the institution, to the school, to the health sciences university, to be able to make that margin? And so that's the toughest part of these jobs. It's easy to be an educator. It was relatively easy because I knew the language of clinical medicine to manage the clinical service lines a bit. The hard part was identifying ways to make it all work financially, to be able to support the faculty as you invest in them, and the reputational currency, which is scholarly activity and research within the institution, and finding ways to be able to generate that. And I was able to do that with some of the hospital systems that I worked with. I also was able to work early on with developing a lot of national changes that we started back when I was in Texas, to develop the upper payment limit programs, which are now across the country. But I created the second one in the United States, was big in Texas, where we were able to create opportunities to subsidize essentially the Medicaid population funding stream, to allow then that overage to invest in patients that didn't have insurance. And that provided the juice to be able to create more value. And I did that in Philadelphia. I did it in, I helped with the state of Pennsylvania as well. And I did it in Virginia as well. And it created value, not to come back to give everybody bonuses or money in our pocket or my pocket. It was really to create more funding to be able to meet the core missions of the medical school and health sciences university, which is essentially education, research, clinical care, and providing the opportunity to care for those most in need.
So Rick, I want to move you forward a little bit to your time in Norfolk. One of the conversations we had, you were telling me how you were responding to the health disparities that you were finding there. And I'd like you to talk a bit about that. It seems to me that a medical school, particularly one in an large urban area, has an obligation to try to redress the imbalances in our care delivery systems, especially for the marginalized folks. Could you speak to that?
Sure. Well, it was beyond even Norfolk, though, because, I learned a long time ago when I was, the National Health Service Corps and a Native American, the White Mountain Apache Indian Reservation, they were underserved. They needed to be cared for. When I was in the rural area in Williamsport, the same thing. In Texas, there were a lot of patients that were underserved there. There were so many patients that were uninsured in Texas. It was roughly about 55% in El Paso, and going up to Amarillo, our most northern campus, was about 20% uninsured. Uninsured, you don't get anything for them. And so, but they need care. And as a doc, what you don't want to do is to find ways to ignore the people that just don't have money, because they're human beings and they need care. So a lot of those individuals that were underserved needed the care. We needed to find ways to be able to finance that. And that was sort of the last conversation we had. But, so in Texas, I helped was participating in the new school in El Paso along the border, to provide more docs in that region and to provide a focus on border medicine there, and created opportunities for a lot of patients that were bilingual. It was actually a requirement for the school to practice there, to take care of the patients along the border. In Virginia, there was an enormous minority population, mostly African American, that were underserved as well. And I created, I created the first office there of diversity and inclusion, and hired an individual, McBib Gametto, who's terrific, from NYU. And we worked together to be able to reconfigure all the enterprises. So we changed the process for the medical school admissions as part of the holistic review. Parenthetically, I was one of the two people that did that when I was in Philadelphia as a pilot program, the AAMC, which was to try to create opportunities to get more underserved and underrepresented minorities in medical school, so that they in turn can provide opportunities for underserved communities from which they came. And we did that in Virginia. We aligned our research program around health disparities. I created an institute, Healthcare Analytics and Discovery Institute, which focused on health disparities. And so we try to align all those different areas, and then developing community service programs and community service requirements for the students as part of the curriculum to meet some of those needs in the community, but more importantly, to understand the context and where they live, where patients live, so that the students don't just think everybody comes in on a cloud, and they may not have any money, but when they're in the community, they realize, how desperate the situation may be, that they don't have sufficient, housing or ability to, have fresh fruits and vegetables, and they don't have transportation. So I think it provided opportunities for the students to recognize that, hey, if a patient comes in who's underserved and they're 30 minutes late for their appointment, you don't tell the nurse, hey, they have to reschedule. Well, guess what? They probably took 3 buses. They have their kids in daycare, or they had to do it while they were in school. They made every effort to come here, and then you're going to turn them away, and they're going to have to go home. I mean, that's just an example, but those are the types of things that are enlightening, I think, to the next generation, to recognize that we're so privileged. Most of us in medicine who are admitted are privileged to get a glimpse and have a better understanding of the challenges that some patients face, and be more empathetic, compassionate. As importantly, too, take the time to take care of those patients when you're in practice as well, okay? You're not gonna get paid for it, but you know what? That's okay. You're a physician, you take care of humanity, do your share, chip in, try to help, work with your community to try to find ways to have solutions for some of those issues.
So one of the things that strikes me is that there is among the people, as you talk about, who are privileged, who are college educated and beyond, there is really not much depth of understanding about the impact of poverty. And poverty, to me, is at the root. There are racial bias issues, but at the core of it, it's poverty. And our ability to serve and to help those communities that are poverty stricken to move forward, whether it's housing or jobs and opportunities or education, etc. In this country, it seems to me that we don't really appreciate the power of poverty.
No, you're right. And there's a cycle of poverty that occurs as well from generation to generation, because the role models just aren't there to be able to spiral out. And you know, the problem is enormous. And I always try to boil it down, you know, because if you say it's enormous and you try to do the big bang, you're not going to get there. What you need to do is to take it in small bites. What can you do? What can we do? You know, to be concrete. How do you find small ways to make a difference? And then through that process, engage more people centripetally to be able to help to focus those resources to leverage it. And, you know, so even in Virginia, what we did was we adopted some of the underserved schools, elementary schools. You know, every year I went in and I washed the bathrooms. The students would put artwork up on the walls. The students would do arithmetic, you know, math and reading, tutoring to the students in that little school. And with the hope that perhaps some of those students would benefit from the education. They'd understand what a health professional is, because it wasn't just medical students. These were also PA students and some PhD students and art therapy and a lot of the health professions, and provide role models for them so that they can perhaps in the future have aspirations to be able to catch the first rung on the ladder, to spiral out of that cycle of poverty through support and education. And if somebody gives them a break and gives them an opportunity to be able to go to college or go to a training school, they could actually find ways to be successful. And through that process, you know, over many years it'll take, you can have an impact. So I think your premise is totally on target. Your audience should probably look, what can I do? Look, realistically, what can I do? What can we do to make a difference? Because it's all those little differences that make big differences over time. We can't influence the political scene. Can't go to Washington and make a big deal. You're gonna be, you know, spinning wheels there. But if you can do something on a small scale that's concrete, that you know is beneficial, it's rewarding to you and rewarding to the community, that pulls more people together.
So there's a movement in this country that's begun. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. It's something called conscious capitalism. Businesses are beginning to recognize that they have an obligation, really, and they can't succeed just by passing money on to their shareholders. But until the employees benefit, until the community that they're based in benefits, they haven't really succeeded. And there's a number of remarkable examples. The Rosen Hotels and Resorts down in Orlando, Florida, is probably the most dramatic one that I know of, where by increasing the strength of their primary care within their company, and they serve about 6,000 employees, but they had robust primary care, and they were able to decrease by going self-administered with their insurance. They were able to decrease their healthcare costs and take some of those savings and reinvest them in the employees and the community that the employees came from. And the results are really remarkable. But it seems to me that a medical school could become a focal point that helps organize those efforts and helps bring in the business community to reinvest in their employees and in the communities of their employees. Is that something that you are familiar with?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, and don't have any specific examples that I can cite that I was personally involved in, outside of philanthropic support and that's the traditional way, where the
Right.
companies would provide philanthropic support to support scholarships for underrepresented minorities, or to provide a clinic someplace. And that was beneficial. But that was part of the philanthropic effort, which was an overage that they sequestered, purposefully, but not out of their P&L, not out of their income statement, so to speak, directly from an operating standpoint. But I think you're right. It's going to take a lot of effort. And that's, again, what I try to mention previously. You have to get as many partners as you can engaged to be able to leverage your ability to be effective. So the more that you can identify strong corporate partnerships, political partnerships, and leverage and bring all those people together, that provides a scale where you can actually move the needle.
Right. So I want to move you forward a little bit in the focus of the conversation. Where do you go from here? You're too young, in my opinion, to just say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go off and play golf. And I know how much you love to play golf and how good you are at it. You could do that on the side, but you've got a lot of energy and vision, and you're one of the forces for good in this country. So where are you going next?
Well, my wife wants me to stay put. We're not moving. I put it that way for the time being. So thank goodness for Zoom. It's the only derivative benefit out of this pandemic that we've all experienced, I think, is the fact that we can do this sort of remotely. But I've been pinged for some full-time positions that I'm not going to consider, because I don't want to do it again. Trying to participate and try to improve the health sciences universities that you work for. I always say, and you work for the faculty. It takes a lot of energy, and it can sap you over time. So I've been also approached by a number of health sciences universities to be able to do consultant work. And so that's what I'm doing now. So I have, people calling me saying, I need help with X, Y, and Z related to academic medicine, the financing, what do we do with, expanding class size, branch campuses. And so I'm doing that on a limited basis. And I've mentored a lot of students and residents, and then my role was faculty and deans and other deans around the country, frankly, because I was one of the most experienced. So most of them left, and I sort of had the thread of being consecutive dean for over 20 years. And I enjoyed that part of it. And so what some people are thinking about having me serve as their sort of executive coach, to be able to guide them through academic careers so that they can find ways to be able to meet their goals, identify what they really are. What do they really want to do? How do they want to develop it? What are tactical ways for you to succeed? How do you want to create a pathway stepwise through your career that can be rewarding for you? So I think it's both in the executive coaching, faculty coaching, and consultancy work, I think, that will keep me busy without forcing me to work 70 to 80 hours a week like I have done for the last 40 years.
Right. So you're going to be out there in Shelter Island. And I mentioned, I forget if I mentioned that we've moved from Dayton, Ohio to Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Right.
So we're actually not that far away from one another these days. It would be lovely to be able to get together in person. I mean, this Zoom thing is great, but chance to see Rita and hang out with you guys would be a true delight.
Well, if you're out this way, let us know, because it's a pretty little spot. It's getting invaded by all the. It used to be invaded by the Audis and the Jaguars. Now the Bentleys are coming on board because everybody's leaving the Hamptons to come to this little island that used to be a fishing village that all of a sudden people have discovered, unfortunately. But where we are, it hasn't changed since I was a kid. We've had it since I was like 5 years old. And so we have a lot of family history, as I mentioned previously, and it's sort of a family legacy and sanctuary. So I'm going to leave it to the next generation and see what they want to do.
That is great. Well, Rick, I appreciate you taking the time to share this story. I'm hoping that it will inspire the leaders within, at least within family medicine, the opportunities. I mean, you taught me that decades ago, the ability of family physicians to respond because of their background and their training, to respond to the service opportunities and turn those into not only financially valuable, but socially valuable by reducing the health disparities and really fulfilling the vision that Barbara Starfield found when she discovered family medicine. So I think there's opportunities to for family medicine to lead and to really from the ground up to create benefit for the communities that they serve. And I want to thank you, number one, for being a model for that. Number two, for sharing that with us today.
It was my pleasure. I look forward to the next generation of family docs because they have such broad breadth of clinical knowledge and such love of their community that they need to merge those together by developing ways to provide value, both to community and the places they serve and the hospital systems that they work in. And through that process can really leave a legacy of our specialty across the country.
Right. It's what I call the family medicine movement.
Yep.
Great. Well, Rick, thank you very much. And please give my best to read it.
Will do. Many thanks.